read to you quite a few verses, so just bear with me because I want to set the scene for you. Starting in verse 1. The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, Sovereign Lord, only you alone know. Then he said to me, Prophesy to these bones and say to them, Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bones to bones. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. How many of you have ever been at the place where God tells you to do something, and he gives you the whole vision, the whole plan, and you go and do it, but yet it doesn't come all the way? It's only halfway. And you're like, wait, I just did what you showed me in my head. This is where he was. He saw the bones come together, the tendons come together, the skin over, everything's flowing in the way that the Lord had said to him, but no breath in them. Then he said to me, Prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, Son of man, and say to it, This is what the Sovereign Lord says. Come, breath, from the four winds, and breathe into these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, our bones are dry, and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, This is what the Sovereign Lord says. My people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live. And I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken and have done it, declares the Lord. Dear Heavenly Father, I pray that you bless your word this morning as it goes forth. Lord, there's a purpose and a reason that you have directed us to Ezekiel 37. There's something that you want to speak to each and every one of us in here. And I pray for just a few moments, God, you would help us to keep our focus and our attention on your word. Because one word spoken from one person can mean many different things to many people. Because your word is alive. So, Father, I pray that it would pierce the hardest heart. I pray that it would settle confusion. I pray that it would open eyes and ears and hearts. I pray that your word would heal the brokenhearted this morning. In your precious name, amen. You may be seated. A famous evangelist once described the North American church as a sleeping giant. This description says that she may look impressive and pompous, but there is little real and genuine spiritual life present. The only sound coming from this pompous organization is a very comfortable snoring sound. I'm not going to point out anybody in here who sometimes snores a little bit during the message, but I think we all know who that person is.
Me.
This sleeping giant needs a lot of prodding to get such a giant moving and to make any significant difference in the world. He says, when Jesus instructed his servant John to write letters to the churches of Asia Minor, he directed John to write to the church in Sardis. These are the words of him who holds the seven spirits of God and the seven stars. Listen to these haunting words to this church. In fact, I just want you just for a moment, and I know it may seem weird to do this, but I just want you to close your eyes. And I want you to hear these words. I know your deeds. You have a reputation of being alive, but you are dead. The evangelist described the North American church as a sleeping giant, a dormant and somewhat useless organization. However, Jesus called the church in Sardis as being altogether dead, and if you will, even lifeless. A sleeping giant may be temporarily paralyzed. A dead and lifeless church is already permanently in the graveyard. Already in the graveyard, ready to be buried. For a sleeping giant to become alive and active, all it needs, and this may seem offensive to some, but my dad used to say this to me when I was a kid and I wouldn't listen to what he was trying to tell me, and he was trying to get my attention and wake me up. Anybody had a mom or dad that ever tried to wake you up? My dad would say to me, "Do you need me to get up and give you a quick, swift kick in the rear end?" And my grandfather actually would do it. He would actually kick you and it hurt, so you moved when he said it. But I think the church today needs a kick in the rear end. It needs to be aroused. It needs to be awakened from its slumber. It needs to get moving. But what can be done about a dead body? What can be done? Can life again enter into it? In other words, can a dead church be revived? The truth is, in America, if we brought in a literal dead person, everybody in here would be ready for the funeral. But there are services going on right now in other countries where loved ones are bringing their dying parents, their dying grandparents. There's some countries where they're already bringing the dead to the evangelist, to the preacher. Do you know why they're doing this? And why we don't bring dead people to church, literally? I'm not encouraging you to do that, but why? This is a question you can answer. You can shout out at me. We're in jeans and t-shirts today, so it's comfortable. Why in other countries are they brave enough to bring a dead person that is not breathing, that has no pulse, that has no life in it? Why would they bring it to an evangelist, a preacher, a pastor, a teacher, whatever? But in America, we would never do that. Why do you think that is? So they have the faith. What do we have? Christian. No, I think a dead body's a dead body wherever you're at. That would be my guess. I think it boils down to this mindset, this thought that we've been conditioned in America because we've read the Bible so many times that we go, "Ooh, Francis, aren't those nice fairy tales? Isn't that sweet what Jesus did to that little boy? Isn't that a cool story we can tell in Kitty's church?" And we've forgotten that it's not just leather, paper, and ink, but that it's the breath of God that's being breathed into us. See, in other countries, when this gets brought to their attention and they didn't know this existed, and Sarah, they say, "Listen, dead bones started shaking, coming together. Tendons started connecting the bones. Skin came over the bones. Breath was breathed into these dead, lifeless bodies." They're just crazy enough to go, "Well, if it's in the Bible, maybe it can happen today." We don't. The truth is, the question isn't, are there dead churches in America today? It's how many dead churches are there in America today? There's tombstones in front of a lot of churches that don't even know it yet. They don't even know that they're dead. Can life again enter into it? Can a dead church be revived? I just quickly want to look back at Ezekiel 37. Ezekiel was from priestly descent. He led the exile to Babylon with the people of Judah in 597 BC. And he speaks here about a revival in a graveyard. You got to understand that this valley wasn't just a valley that dead bones were in. This was a mass grave. This would be like going over to Germany during the Holocaust. And when they opened up those graves and they saw the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of bones, that's what he was seeing. So I want you to see this about revival. I got a couple points. Revival is preceded by a desperate condition. It's also prompted by divine prophecy from God. And finally, it produces a dynamic army. I know that's weird for me to give you all 3 points right at the beginning, but I wanted you to have them all down in case you get up and leave. It's preceded by a desperate condition. Something has to happen. It has to be so dire for revival to come. And then a divine prophecy. Something has to be spoken from God for revival. Listen, even if we all go, yeah, I want revival here. If God doesn't want revival here, it's not going to happen. It's not up to us. I can't revive anything. It's God. It's whether or not He prophesies over us and says, I want revival here. I want to breathe breath in this place. But then revival isn't just for revival's sake, so we can say we had 6 or 7 great services and everybody came out and we cried and snorted all over each other. Didn't that feel good? Wasn't that awesome? Good. He said no. Because it's true, that's not what it's about. The revival is supposed to rise up an army. The Lord displays for Ezekiel a vision of a large valley. In fact, it's a field where it seems that a vicious battle has been fought. The valley is full of bones. It says great many bones, hundreds of thousands of bones. The vision, now to us it's not that terrifying because we're reading about it. But to Ezekiel, this is a terrifying vision because all of a sudden he's walking along and God opens his eyes and says, look at this. Look at this horrific scene that has taken place here. God says to Ezekiel, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. These bones represent the 10 northern tribes captured and exiled by Assyria in 722 BC. A valley of dead bones. Its condition is like the church in Sardis Jesus identified as dead. Although it had a reputation of being alive. My question is, the reason I have you close your eyes is it's easy to read Ezekiel 37 and see a valley of dry bones. It's easy to hear about Sardis. But can the same be said about our church? Could God be looking at us and saying, I know that you think you have a reputation of being alive, but to me you're dead. I can't think of more haunting words to hear from God than that you're dead. Perhaps it's the church. We notice also that Ezekiel says about these bones that they are very dry. The death house of Israel was not just a recent occurrence, but this death had a long, long history. It talks about dry bones. Anybody ever been out west? I know Jack and Michelle, their family, go every year. Have you ever gone through the desert and seen the skulls of the bones so dried up that they're just bright white? There's nothing left in them. Death has overtaken every single part of that bone. And then Ezekiel says that he hears from God. God tells him to start prophesying over these bones. For us to ever experience a divine move of God, we have to hear a divine prophecy from God. We have to hear him speak to us what to do, where to go. That's why revival can become very deadly if we're not listening to God. That's why revival has torn a number of churches apart, because they tried to do it without hearing from God. When to start, when to stop. I can't tell you, and I know you're going to study some of the revivals and different things that have taken place. Most, if not all, of the revivals that stop because of man, not because of God. Because man got in the way, they stopped hearing from God. I remember talking with Linda Cooley, who was the worship leader at Brownsville Pensacola Revival. And they went 7 years in a 6-night revival. You guys were wore out with Brother Monk for a couple days. They went 7 years, 6 nights. And I was sitting with him at the time it was the RCA Dome in downtown Indianapolis, and I asked him, I said, Linda, what was it that stopped it? Because at this point, he had just became the pastor of a church in Nashville, Tennessee. And he said, we did. We got too comfortable. We got too used to it. We expected. We stopped listening to God. There has to be a divine prophecy. Although everything looks hopeless, although God may open your eyes and say, look at the condition of your church. It's dead, it's dry, and it's desolate. But is that the end of Ezekiel, that God just says to him, hey, Ezekiel, look out at this valley. There's a bunch of dead bones. What do you think? Was that the end of the story? Why do we buy that story then? Can I tell you that Pastor Andy and I used to get so angry when we first moved here because of how many people asked us why we moved to this godforsaken town. Some of them were in this very church. You're looking at valleys of bones, but you're not hearing what God's saying. God's not looking at valleys of bones. He's not looking at Streator as it's finished and over. See, some of us have got to start hearing from God, because he's going to speak to you something about this place, that it doesn't have to be the way it's always been, and that he may not take it to the place that it used to be. I want life. I want to hear from God like Ezekiel heard from God when God said, you see those bones? I want to do something into them. And what does Ezekiel do? He follows the command of God. He hears God say, speak. What is he speaking, Elaine, over these bones? But he's speaking one word. He's speaking something over these bones. What is he speaking? Life. Everybody knows, Tracy, those bones are dead. It doesn't take a real genius to look at that and say there's no life in there. So why would he pray over these bones? Dead bones? Why are we praying? God, touch our dead church. God, our church used to be great. We used to do great things. We used to have this. We used to do that. Why are you praying? Why are you speaking death over death? Why haven't you started speaking life over your church? Life over your pastor? Life over your board members? Life over your Sunday school teachers? When was the last time you spoke life over our youth ministry? Our children's ministry? See, Ezekiel heard from God and he started the commands of God. God said, I want you to speak over those bones to come together. And they started coming together. I want you to speak tendons to come to connect these bones so it's just not bones. Because that would scare the living daylights out of everybody if bones just started walking out of the valley, right? So he follows the command of God. But he misses a step. He hasn't prayed life into the bones yet. Life into the body. And as soon as he looks to God, let me ask you this. Anytime that God ever asks a question in the Bible, is it because he doesn't know what the answer is to it? So he asked Ezekiel, can these bones live again? How many of you have ever woken up early in the morning or late at night with a knock on your door and God saying, can your church live again? Do you think God is concerned about Streator First Assembly and whether or not it's going to live or die? He is concerned, but he knows the answer to it. He's trying to wake you up, like he was trying to wake Ezekiel up to, I know you see this valley, but can they live again? Can they breathe again? Can it be this vast, strong army that I'm prophesying to you about? And finally, the revival God would bring to Israel would produce a dynamic army. The revival, as prophesied by Ezekiel, occurs in 3 stages: from bones to bones, from bones to living beings, and from living beings to mighty armies. Do you know, I think that most churches make it to about the 2nd stage. We see dead men and women walking into the church, and life gets breathed into them, and they feel good that they're alive, and then we stop. Where's the army at? Better be getting ready for something. We have to hear from God. He's pulling us together, not just to breathe life in us, not just for us to feel good, not just for us to be blessed, not just for us to prosper. We become so individual in the church that it's, Sarah, pray for me, I got to do something in my life. Don't ignore Joyce right now. Don't listen to her. Pray for me, pray for me, pray for me. And that's how we do in the church. We come in single-minded, tunnel vision. Oh, if they could just pray for me, my situation. But we don't even hear the situation next to us. We don't even notice the people next to us weeping and crying and hurting and broken. We don't even notice it. And then when we get touched, the thought is that, oh, God moved in me, so I want to go to somebody that's hurting. It's, oh, I'm going to go on Facebook and put a really cool Christian meme. Isn't God good? Instead of coming next to the... That's what I love about the military, is no one left behind. That you could be in the middle of a gunfight and you're shooting and soldiers are shooting against the enemy and their buddy next to them gets shot and they're bleeding out on the battlefield. And instead of continuing to fight the army, instead of just trying to protect themselves behind a rock, any good soldier is going to put his gun down and he's going to go over and he's going to grab that soldier. How many soldiers have been shot trying to save another soldier? But that's what they're taught to do. You want to be a great army? That's the kind of soldiers that you want. Those that won't leave anyone behind. They have the mindset, we came in together, we're going to go out together. And in the church, we need to have that same mindset. We're coming in together, we're going out together. It has to stop being me against them. I don't find it a bit strange that, and I said this to the board this morning, and we had some prayer time together, that while we're trying to draw together closer as a church the enemy is trying harder to tear apart and pull apart. And this morning, as I was walking through the hallways praying over our church, God tapped me on the shoulder and He said, maybe none of you guys grew up like this, but this is how it was for me. None of my family is very close. And so occasionally we would do family reunions, total opposite of Amy's family. They would always do family reunions. We would have them every so often. And every time we would go to them, all hell would break loose. Uncle Ronnie said this, and Aunt Judy said that. And it would just start World War III. Anybody else's family reunions, like anything like that, when you get the family all together? That's how our family was. Instead of coming together and spending time and being glad that we're all in the same state, in the same house, spending time together, it's just friction and friction. And God's trying to draw us closer and closer because of what Dave said, that the army needs to start getting prepared for what? Warfare. How do we get prepared for warfare? How do we? I can't beat an army by myself. What I need to have? I need to have an army with me. And how can I have an army with me that every time Joy says something to me, I kick her to the ground and I try to hold her down there so that I can be on top and she's on bottom? That's a great war strategy. Let me hold one of the assets that God has given to me to stand beside me and to support me. Let me hold them down so I'm standing all alone and exposed now. Anybody want to go to battle? But we do that in the church. Let's talk with Pastor Amy. I'm going to close. Let's talk with Pastor Amy about her pastor's wife retreat, and almost every pastor's wife that was there started talking about issues in their church. Turmoil and fighting and gossiping and backbiting and all these things going on. I'm going to ask you a simple question. I know you know the answer and you're going to blurt it out real quick. But is that of God?
No.
Then why do we do it? Listen, to make it a little closer, why do we, Streator First Assembly, why do we do it? Why do we fight with each other? The moment that I get distracted by you, and I let my guard down and I let my flesh up, the enemy has won. And we aren't even aware yet at that time that the battle is going on now. We think we're still in preparation mode. We still think we're just getting ready and the enemy is beating the daylights. You know how many people leave the church in a fight and never come back? Does that sound like preparation or does that sound like war? You know how many pastors walk away from the pulpit? I had a really good friend of mine that was pastoring a church that was growing and thriving, and he left the ministry, left the pulpit to be a supervisor at Walmart. That was more appealing to being behind the pulpit. You know why? He wasn't aware that he was already in war and that the enemy had beaten him down. And all I could do is crawl away. I want you to stand with me this morning. I believe God is speaking to our church. I believe that He's been speaking for quite some time. And this message I've had for about 2 weeks. Nobody wanted to come to my house last Sunday and let me preach to them, so I just preached to myself and then preached it again this morning. But God has been speaking to this church. When are we going to allow Him to prophesy over our church? Listen to this though. It's very generic and very, I don't even know if this is a word, but impersonal. That's the word I'm looking for. It's very impersonal to say, God, prophesy over our church. He's not going to prophesy over our church. He's going to prophesy to us. And then a call is going to come. Ezekiel 37 would mean nothing if Ezekiel would have walked out and looked over that valley and saw a bunch of dead bones and said, God, you want me to do what? You want? Just be real for a moment. How many of you would take a second look? A bunch of religious people, the liars. You would have looked maybe 3 or 4 times. God, you want me to speak? I'm telling you right now, if God said that to me, it would be a struggle. You want me to speak over something that not only is it dead, but it doesn't even look like a human body. It's just bones upon bones upon bones. I'll just be real, I'd have a little more faith if somebody had only been dead for a couple minutes. And God said, pray over them. They came out, But bright white bones on a table, and God says, go over there and start praying for them. Have you ever thought, when you read Ezekiel 37, was there anybody there watching Ezekiel? Was any of his buddies around? Any of his family? Any of the townspeople? And here this guy is standing over this valley of dead bones, and he's going, hey, bones! Come together! You're going to come alive! They would have been saying, Ezekiel, come here, I want to show you something for a second. What crazy thing is God speaking to you about to believe life over it? Maybe it's your marriage. Maybe you're looking at your marriage as it's dead. And I'm not talking about maybe you're thinking about divorce, or you're separated, or maybe you just got divorced. Sometimes you've been divorced for years. And God starts speaking to you about your marriage, and you go, God, what marriage? I'm divorced. And God's looking down going, what you call dead isn't dead to me yet. Maybe you're looking at your job and you're saying, God, this is a dead-end job. Anybody ever made that statement before? And what if God starts prophesying to you? I put you there for a reason. Why do you not see life? Why do you see death? This one I know is going to hit home with a lot of people when you open the checkbook and it's got death written all over it. Anybody ever opened their checkbook like that before? And you go, oh Lord, how is anything going to come from this? And God says, Chris, I want you to start praying over your checkbook life. I want you to stop complaining. I want you to stop being negative. I want you to start proclaiming life over what you thought was dead. So I want you to bow your head and close your eyes with me for a moment. Because I feel like God's going to start speaking to individuals separately. Because I felt all morning that He said this was going to be personal. This was not going to be corporate. This was going to be personal. So do not think you need to hear from God the same way your neighbor hears from God. Because I believe He's going to speak to us all differently. As you have your eyes closed and your head bowed, I think some of you already know before I even ask the question. But what thing or things in your life can you look at right now and you say, God, I've given up on it because I thought it was dead. Because I don't see any life in it anymore. All I see is a valley of dead bones. All I see is great devastation and destruction that has sucked the life If God has already spoken to you what it is, I just want you to raise your hand this morning. If God has spoken to you what that death is. See a couple hands. I know God's still speaking because He's confirmed it. If you raise your hand, I just want you to find a place at the altar. I'm going to have anybody pray with you right now because this is personal. I'm not going to ask you. I want to know what your things are. So like I said this morning, God's got to prophesy to you how to speak over this death in your life. I need you to know that it's not hopeless. That's why God has you here this morning. Because He's revealing to you the things that you thought were dead. But you have to stop looking for somebody to give you the answer. And you need to start asking God to give you a divine prophecy over this thing in your life that's dead. One more time. Those that maybe didn't want to come or you weren't ready yet or God's still speaking to you. Is there something in your life that you've been looking over? A husband, a wife, a child, a job, your finances, your health. You've just given up. You said, God, I don't think it can be changed. I don't think it can get better. And God this morning has taken you to that precipice. He's taken you to that valley. And when you look in that valley, you see the same thing that Ezekiel saw as death. But God's taken you to that valley to show you life. A great army came out of that valley of death. What does God want to bring out of your valley this morning? I'm just going to give another moment. So I feel a check in my spirit not to end quite yet. It's between you and God. But you've got to acknowledge that you need to hear from Him. You need to acknowledge you need a divine word from God. Because it's going to be His breath breathing in to your situation to bring it to life. You can't fix this. Ezekiel couldn't fix that valley of dry bones. Till the breath of God enters your situation. You're just going to keep trying and trying and trying. If that's you, come to this altar. Find a place alone with God this morning. Speak to our hearts this morning, Lord. I know there's a great tug of war going on right now. Hearts are torn. And you're speaking right now. Jesus. Father, I pray for those that have come to this altar this morning, God, that whatever it is that they're seeing in that valley, I pray that you would open their eyes to see hope and to see life again. That there's nothing beyond your grip. There's nothing beyond your breath that you can breathe life into. But I pray they would hear the word from you. What is it you're asking them to do? Have they even begun yet to pray life over these situations? Or have we gone to our default to complain and be negative and to think and believe that it is hopeless? You've spoken this morning that nothing is hopeless until you're done. each one of these situations that are represented here. God, only you know what is going on in the hearts and the minds of your children this morning. But you've got a word for each one. I pray that they would have an ear to hear your word. But not just hear your word, but be a doer as Ezekiel was a doer of your word. It wasn't just the prophecy that he had to have. He also had to have a voice to speak forth the prophecy. So I pray they hear from you this morning, but God, that they start to speak, that there starts to become action to what it is they're facing in their life. Father, I pray that you give them a boldness, give them courage, give them strength. Help them to not care about what anybody else said, like Ezekiel when he just walked to that valley. He didn't look to the right or the left, but he prophesied what you said to do. I pray that's how they would take their situation. And I pray, Father God, we would start hearing about life out of death situations. Father, we just thank you.